Hey, this is Bill Raymond, and welcome to another Up and Running with Git and GitHub video. This time, we're going to be working with Visual Studio Code. Let's get started. Git is an open source software solution for distributed version control software. We'll get into that once we start using it, so you understand that a little bit better as we go. It was created by Linus Torvalds, who created the Linux kernel, and almost all software products support it. Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code being two, but also Xcode and any other software development product today probably has Git either built in or support is forthcoming. Now, the thing that you need to know is that it is a technology that allows you, right on your computer, to manage and maintain your code, and it tracks all of the changes you make to it. Now, working on your computer is all fine and good. You can do things like create your code, branch out your code to try out new features or create new versions. You can even revert your code to fix problems that you need to undo. But why just do that with your code when you can actually store it on a server? There's a bunch of reasons for why you want to do that. Of course, the obvious one is that you have a backup of your code. But you might also want your code to be available for other people to collaborate. Whether it's a private collaboration with some people in your company, or it's an open source collaboration where you want other people to see your code, try it, maybe even share some ideas and work with you on it. So think of it this way, where Git is an open source software version control system, GitHub is a commercial business, they're run by Microsoft, that provides a web-based or server-based platform to collaborate with other people. We only have 2 slides left, and I just want to walk you through some basic concepts before we get started. When you write your code, there's a very good chance that you're going to start writing it on your local computer. When you put your code in your local computer, that's called a local repo or repository. Now, your code can actually have multiple repositories. For example, some people have a repository for the user interface of the product, another repository for business logic, another repository for managing their databases, or it could just be one. It all depends on how you organize things. But what's important for you to know is the term repo represents a piece of code or all of your code that you're working on for your software solution. A remote repo or a remote repository is where you can put your code up online somewhere, whether it's a server that's housed in your company's network or it's hosted up on the cloud. GitHub offers both types of solutions. Normally what you'll do is you'll write your code on your local computer and then synchronize that up to GitHub. Now, I will point out that there are people that create a repository in GitHub and actually manage their code from there. That's perfectly fine to do that. But for the most part, a lot of people like to get their repository down on their computer because that's where they can quickly test it. They have all the tools that they need. Now that you know the basics, head over to code.visualstudio.com. Download the version that you want. I'm going to download the Mac version, but you can download a Mac OS, Windows, and Linux version. Everything I'm showing you is built into all 3 versions, to the best of my knowledge. I've worked with Mac OS and Windows versions. I also recommend you download the stable version because the insiders builds have future features that may or may not fully function as you might expect. When you run Visual Studio Code for the first time, it will look something like this. We're going to create a local repo on our computer, and then we're going to get that up onto GitHub. So we'll go to the File menu, and oddly enough, I'm going to choose Open because there's no new directory option. There's an add folder to workspace, but I just like to do this. I like to go to the File menu and choose Open, then go somewhere. In my case, I'm going to do this on my desktop and create a new folder. And I'm just going to call this my app. Now, all the cool kids use dashes in Git and Git repositories instead of spaces, so you might want to consider that too. I'll click the Create button and then click Open. There. Now we're in the My App folder. You can see that over here on the left. I'm going to close this welcome screen to get that out of the way. And then I'm going to create a new file. And in this file, I'm going to do something really simple. I'm going to type h1 in brackets and type hello world, and then close those brackets just like this. And I'll save it. And in here, I'm just going to call this index.html. That's my code. Now, anyone that knows HTML knows that this is totally the wrong way to code it. The point here is I'm showing you how to use GitHub, not how to code. Now that we've saved the file, we can put it into a Git repository. But before we do, we just want to test this out. Now, there's a whole bunch of ways that you can open a file in a browser. I'm just going to do it one way, which is a simple way. I'm going to click this little icon here with the blocks, and this is an extension marketplace. You can download a whole bunch of things here. There's actually a lot of Git and GitHub tools, so you can check those out. But I'm just going to find one called Open in Browser and install that. There we go. Go back to my files. And now I can just go ahead and right-click this and choose Open in Default Browser. And there we go. There's our working code. It says Hello World in that heading tag. At this point, we have a folder with a file in it, and we want to get this whole folder into Git control. So what do? We come over here to these icons, and we find the branching icon and click that. You'll see it says source control with the plus sign next to it, and down below it says no source control providers are registered. Well, let's do that now. I'll click the plus sign, and a little pick list will show up saying, where do you want to add your repo? And in my case, it's the My App folder. Verify that this is accurate. Be really careful here. I have heard horror stories of people accidentally putting their entire My Documents folder or desktop under source control. It's actually pretty easy to fix if that happens, but you don't want to deal with that nonsense. So just make sure that you're just putting that folder into source control. In my case, I'm just going to click on this, and you can see that immediately a few things happen. One, over here on the left-hand side, there's the source control icon with a little 1 next to it saying there's a pending change. 2, over here you'll see there's a changes area and there's an index.html file. 3, there's a little U here that says that the file is untracked. Well, Git notices that there is a file here. It's saying untracked is essentially basically telling you, or telling Git rather, that it's not keeping track of this file. It's not really under source control. So if I click this little plus sign next to it that says stage changes, now the file is staged. And Git's saying, okay, I'm aware of this now, and I'm kind of storing it in my list of files to manage under source control. But this change really hasn't made itself fully available. You can still see that there's this red here saying this is the original file and this is our proposed change. So nothing with Hello World and then something with Hello World. If I really want to make this Hello World part of my code, then I need to commit this into source control. And so that's where commit messages come in. And that's what this little bar is up here at the top. You can see it says message and then command enter to commit onto master. Now I know that I happen to be on the master branch, and we're going to get into this branching in just a moment. So if you're not familiar with everything I'm saying here, you'll get used to it in just a little bit. But down here at the bottom left-hand corner of Visual Studio, you can see there's master. That's the branch that we're working on. So when I commit my code, I'm committing it to this master branch. And when you do a commit, what you're typically doing is typing some sort of a message. And since this is our initial commit, I'll just say initial commit with index.html file. Now, you want to really be very succinct about what you're typing in your commit message. You'll notice that if I just keep on typing here, I'm going to start to get a message from, there we go, from Visual Studio Code saying, you really don't want to use more than 50 characters. So you're really trying to make your commit message as simple as possible. All right, so I'm on the Mac, so I'm going to type Command Enter. If you're on a PC, you press Control Enter. And there. You can see that there are no changes here, and that little blue icon went away. And if I come up here to my, oh, well, actually, before I do that, you can now see that there's no longer a red line here saying the original file had nothing in it and the new file had hello world. You can see that it's all up to date now. So I'll go ahead and close that. Now if I come up here to files, I just have my index.html file like I always did. But now I know that this is the most up-to-date version in Git. At this point, you created a folder on your computer, you added some code, you initialize Git, so now this folder is a Git repo, a local Git repo. You even did a little commit. But at this point, it's best to just get your code synchronized with GitHub. You don't want to go too far without doing that. It's just going to take more work later down the road if you wait. While you could create your GitHub repository on your local computer using a terminal command, we're not going to do that. We're going to use the Visual Studio Code user interface. So if you haven't done so already, sign up for GitHub and log in. Then go to your avatar and choose your repositories. Now you're going to create the repository that your local repo will feed into here on GitHub. So click the New button and type your repo name. In this case, it's my app, my dash app. Now, I could type my great app, and that would be perfectly fine. I could sync with that. However, it's really not a very good practice. If you have a folder called My App on your computer, it should be My App on GitHub. Now, it gives you a bunch of options to enter a description, make it public private, initialize a readme file. I suggest you just stick with the defaults right now, and then we'll go and take a look at those options later. So create the repository. And there you go. You now have the repository created. You can see here's my account name. It says /myapp, and there's a URL. As a matter of fact, I'm going to copy that URL right now so that I can use it later when I'm setting it up inside of Visual Studio Code. Do note that if you are familiar with Git, it actually gives you the command lines to get the code up from your computer into GitHub. But we're not going to do that. That's something that you can learn in another video, or maybe I'll do another one later to show you how to use Git using Visual Studio Code on the terminal window. But right now we're just going to use the user interface. Now we're going to get our Git repository that's local to our computer into GitHub. If I do Command-Shift-P or Control-Shift-P, I can go ahead and type push to. And that's what you might think is the right thing to do. But if I choose this, because I'm saying push this up to a remote Git repository, it's saying your repository has no remotes configured. There's a gear icon, then a little manage extensions thing, and this whole thing comes up. Let's close that. We're not doing it that way because what we need to first do is add what we call a remote. And so all we're doing is telling Git that we have another remote repository. We're not syncing anything yet, just telling it we have a remote repository. So how do we do that? I can just type add remote and press enter. It's going to ask for a remote name. This is just a friendly name for it. So of course, I'm just going to type my app, my-app. So it's the same thing as the folder on my computer, same thing as a repo name in GitHub, and press enter. Then it will ask for the URL. If you recall, I grabbed that earlier, but just as a reminder, here it is right here. That's github.com/your username/ the repo name. And I'll just go ahead and press enter here. So really nothing has happened other than to just tell Git that we have a remote repository. Here is a time where I remind you that I am still learning Git myself. I had all sorts of problems synchronizing my code between Git and GitHub. So what I learned is that right after I add the remote, if I don't do this in Visual Studio Code, there's a problem later. So I do Command-Shift-P or Control-Shift-P, and I type fetch. And I'm just going to press enter, return, and it looks like nothing happened. But I think what it's doing is it's updating these sort of references between what's on my local computer and what's in GitHub. If you have some better explanation as to why I have to do this, go ahead and enter it into the comments. Otherwise, just know I've probably saved you a whole bunch of headaches later. At this point, we've told Visual Studio Code we do have a remote, and we've also ran the fetch command, but we haven't put any code up into GitHub yet. As a matter of fact, if I come over here to GitHub and refresh the page, you can see there's no code in here. So I'll go back into Visual Studio Code, and now we're going to synchronize our code up with GitHub. Now, there's a few ways you can do it. Of course, if you look down here at the bottom of the screen, there's a little Publish Changes option down there. So that's one option. Another option is to come here to the Git icon, and you can see this little menu here. And I haven't mentioned this before, but here are all the common Git commands right here in its own little menu. Okay, but what I'm going to do is just do Control-Shift-P and sync. And it says the branch master has no upstream branch. Would you like to publish this branch? Yeah, I'll do that. Click OK. It's saying where to. I want to publish this to that my app GitHub repository. So I'll press enter on that. And you can see there's a little icon here saying it's doing stuff over here next to the branch icon, and it's done. So let's go ahead and come over here to GitHub, and I'll refresh the page. And now we should see our code. There it is. That's the index file that we created. So cool, we have that here on GitHub. While we're here on GitHub, we might as well add a README file. This is something that's recommended for any Git repo. You create this thing called readme with all capital letters with a .md or markdown file extension. So we're going to go ahead and create this here. And the point of creating it here is so I can show you how to get the code from GitHub back down to your computer. So I'll choose add a readme. And you can see it's in markdown language. That's what that .md stands for. This hashtag just means my app is going to be in sort of a heading 1 format. If I were to write what it will look like in HTML, it would look something like this. So I'm not going to go ahead and worry about explaining markdown to you right now, but I am just going to say, do something like, welcome to my app. You can use the app to do lots of things. Okay, good. And it's going to create a commit message for me. It says create readme.md, and I'm not going to enter a description. So that's all good. And I'm going to put it right here in the master branch right now. And I'll commit that new file. There, we now have a README for our Git repository on GitHub. Now, if I come back over here to Visual Studio Code, you'll notice that that README file is not there. Well, why is that? One of the things that you really have to recognize about Git and GitHub, and also Visual Studio Code and any other code solutions, IDEs, is there's a really good chance there's not going to be any automation here. You own the code. You decide if you ever even want to let GitHub send code back down to your local repository. You decide if you ever want to put code back up onto GitHub. Okay, so you're in full control. What that also means is that when new code gets updated in that repo, you have to know about it, you have to sync, and you have to do something manually. Now, Visual Studio Code comes with settings to automatically sync every now and again. You can write up your own kind of automations, but out of the box, this is how it works. You have to go in and synchronize the code. Okay, so I've said enough. Let's do a Command-Shift-P or Control-Shift-P, and I'm just going to do that git sync. Now, I want to point out something here. I could just, you'll notice that there's push, where you can push your code up into GitHub, and there's all these other different options here. You could also choose a pull from, and that will get the code from GitHub. I tend to like, from my workflow, to do sync. This way I'm always keeping my local repository and my GitHub repository in sync. You can choose to do differently if you so desire. Okay, I'll choose Git Sync, and I'll just go ahead and click OK, and there's the readme file. Great. So now we've just taken our first line of code from GitHub, or our first code file rather, from GitHub down to our local repo. Now we're going to talk about branching. Now, if I do a Command-Shift-P, Control-Shift-P, and I type checkout to, you can see there's actually two branches that are in our product right now, our Git repo. There's master, and that's the one that we're in. And I know that because if I look down here at the bottom left of the screen, I can see that little master down there. But then there's a my app/master. That's the Git repo master. So we'll work off of this master branch. So what on earth is a branch? Well, when you're writing your code, you might want to create a new feature and test that before you put it back into the production code. So the one way to think about this is, and there's lots of schools of thoughts on this, but the best way that I like to think about this for my workflow is that the master branch is always the thing that represents production code. It has no bugs, or at least the least amount of bugs. It's something that I can push out to my customers. All other branches are bug fixes, new features, anything that I'm trying out and I don't want to impact the core of my code. So here's our strategy. We've got this index file right here, and it just says hello world. Well, I would like this to show some more information to my customer, but I don't want to do that until I've fully tested it. So what I'm going to do is create a brand new branch. So I'll do my Command-Shift-P, Control-Shift-P, and I'll just type branch. And you can see there's a whole bunch of branch commands here. And I'm going to choose the create branch one. It's going to say, what's the branch name? And I'm just going to say, add description to index. Okay? I'm doing this in lowercase with dashes. That seems to be how people like to do that. I'm just going to go ahead and press enter. And there is my new branch. As a matter of fact, I might have even made a branch that's too long, but at any point, there it is. Okay. So since this is selected and I know it's selected, what I can do is come into my code and add a description to my index file. So I'll say, this app allows you to do lots of things. And there's my description that I want to put into the index file. I can save that. Maybe I'll even open it up in the browser to make sure it works. There it is. That works. Okay. I'm going to go back into Visual Studio Code. And what we can see is that there's this blue icon with the number 1 next to the branching icon. So I'll go ahead and click that. And you can see right now that the index file is showing as modified. And I can just enter a commit message because I'm happy with the code. Now, I've been showing you how to use this Git area here to do your work. But what if you're in the files area and you're kind of done with clicking around to get from one area to another? You don't actually have to come in here and enter your Git message. If you're working in files, you can just do your Command or Control-Shift-P, and you can just say commit. And then you can say added descriptor to the index file or something like that, and press enter, and it's all up to date. If I come back here to the Git icon, you can see that there's no changes pending. Cool. So we've made that change. Now let's go over here to the files, and I can see there's that helpful text that I just wrote. But what happens when I go to the master? So I'll do Control-Shift-P, and I'll choose checkout to, and I'll come over here to the master file, to the master branch rather. And notice that the code is not in here. So this is interesting. What I need to do is get the code from that other branch into the master. So I do make sure that I do a checkout to and choose master. That's what I just did. And now I'm going to do a Control-Shift-P again, and I'm going to say merge branch, and I'm going to choose the add description to index branch, and that's going to merge it from there into the current branch I'm in, which is master. Press enter. There. So now my descriptive text is here in the index file, in the master, and if I were to go to the other branch, checkout to, it's the same exact code. So what we've essentially done is we've written the code in this one add description to index branch, and then when we went into the master, we merged it back in. Now, remember what I said earlier in this demonstration, nothing is automatic. So if I come over here to the index file, you can see it just still says hello world in GitHub. So I'm going to go back into Visual Studio Code, do my Command or Control-Shift-P, do my sync option, OK, wait for that little blue clock to disappear, then go into GitHub, and I'll refresh. And you can see there's that commit message that I did, add a descriptor to index file. And if I click on the index.html file, there is our new descriptive text. Okay, so cool. We've just done some branching. I want to look at something though. There's something odd on this page. I'm going to refresh the page. Why does it say one branch? If I come down here to the index and I come over here to branch, where's that add descriptive text branch? Well, it turns out that Visual Studio Code does not send all changes for your entire repo. Instead, what it does is it sends just the changes for the selected branch. So if you want this add descriptive, I'm going to check out here, check out to, add description to index branch. If I want this up in GitHub as well, then I also have to sync this branch. So now that I'm in the branch, I'll just go ahead and do my sync. And I'll wait for that to complete. Looks like it's done. And now I'll just refresh this page. And I'll click the drop down here, and now you can see the other branch. Now, there's a command that you can use, which is --all when you sync in Git. But by default, Visual Studio Code does not do that, which is why I have to go and manually sync that branch. What we've done so far is created a repo on our local computer and then put it up onto GitHub. But one of the most powerful things about GitHub is this is a huge open source community where you can download code to use for your next project. And to get that code, you want to bring it down to your computer by way of cloning. Now, there's a whole conversation around forking that I'm not going to get into here, but the idea is that you can clone a repo from GitHub down to your computer so you can work on it. So that's what we're going to do next. In our case, we're just going to create a very simple project right from our GitHub page, repo rather. I'll click the new button, and I'll just call this clone from GitHub. And by the way, I use dashes here all the time. I don't think you need to do dashes in your repository name, but anyway, that's what I do. And we're just going to initialize this repository with a readme and click Create Repository. There. Now you'll see this clone or download button here, and this is available on almost any repo that you'd visit. You'll see it says clone with HTTPS. First of all, you can download the zip file and just unzip it in your computer. You could also open it in GitHub Desktop if you've installed that. But I'm just going to copy this URL here. That's what I'm looking for. Now, if I just kind of scroll over here to the right, you can see it's basically the name of the URL is the same URL for our repo, but at the end it just has .git. And so this is kind of the thing that you don't see on the screen here, but it's what we're going to use to clone it on our local computer. This time I opened Visual Studio Code with nothing open. So I'm just going to go and do my Control or Command Shift P, type clone, and that's my git clone command. I'll press enter. It'll ask for the repository URL, which I'll paste in, and you can see there's that .git that we talked about. I'll press enter, and then it's going to ask you where to store it. And I'll go over here to the desktop, and I'll create a new folder, and I'm just going to call this the same exact thing that we called it in GitHub. And just as a reminder, here it is. It's called clone from GitHub. We like to keep the names the same, so I'll just type clone from GitHub and click create. And then select repository location. You'll see that Visual Studio Code is cloning it. And now it's saying, hey, would you like to open this? I'll just say yes. Visual Studio Code will open the folder, which you see here. And here's the readme file that we just created. And unlike the earlier lesson where I was showing you how to create a folder on your local computer, you don't need to do that fetch, I don't think. So you can always do it with your Command or Control Shift P and just do fetch, but I haven't found the need for that. So I'm going to do a little change just to kind of wrap all of this up. I'll say, welcome to my project. I'll just add some text there. Save it. Command or Control Shift P to commit. Added welcome text to readme is my commit message. Press enter. And now I'll do my Command or Control Shift P and choose sync and sync that up to GitHub. Little clock here will turn off. There, that's done. We'll head over here to Chrome, and you can see it says clone from GitHub, and when I refresh, I should see that new welcome text. And I do. So there you go, you're all set. You've just cloned your first repository from GitHub down to your local computer. Here are some tips and tricks that I learned along the way. First of all, remember that Command Shift or Control Shift P are your best friend, so get used to using those. The other is, if you want to work with Git, I think I already pointed this out earlier in the video, you don't always have to keep coming back here to source control. Let me show you a really fast workflow, for example. I'm just going to click here and create a new file called about.html. And then I'll just type reach us here. All right, and I'll save that file. I know that that is in Git as a new file, but I still need to commit it to make the change. So I'll just do Control Shift P, commit, added about HTML file, and press enter, and then I can just go Control Shift P, sync to get that up onto GitHub so it's up to date. So I've done all of that without having to go clicking around all over the user interface to get that up to date. And remember, I can also do Control Shift P and Checkout to choose the master, and then I can do Control Shift P again to merge that branch that I was just working on into the master. And so now that about.html is in the master branch. So as you can see, I can do a whole lot of work here just with these Control Shift P commands. While we're talking about editing files and committing things, I might come in here to the about file and just add some text here and save it, and then come down to the index file and add a few more things. 1, do this. 2, it can do that, and so on. And so I'm making changes to my code and saving it. Well, I don't want to have to go into each file and do Control-Shift-P and commit. So I can just do Control-Shift-P, type commit all, and there, I can commit all of these changes. You can see this was going to go from 2 to 1, and I'm going to just say modify about and index with required details or something like that. Okay, and press enter. And you can see all the changes went away. I didn't have to commit the about file and the index file. Now do think about best practices when you're doing this. If you do a commit all on 2 different files, but they're for unrelated work, then I would say that you want to commit each file individually rather than committing them all at the same time. Now I think it's very important that you learn the Git command line. Everything I showed you here was to get you started and get you familiar with it. You're going to learn that you're going to need to use the command line for all sorts of things, and all the documentation online uses the command line. Anyway, I'm going to show you how you can do that in Visual Studio Code. We're not going to go through a whole workflow here. I'm just going to demonstrate how you can do it, so then you can start learning on your own. I'm going to edit this index.html page, and I'm going to add another feature to my product. It can also do this other thing. Okay, and I'll save the file. And you'll see right here there's a change. It's been modified to the file, and you know that we can enter the commit message here. We can do Command-Shift-P and commit. Or we could also, if we have Git installed, we can go to the terminal window. And you can see here that I have the command line. And I can just type in git commit index.html -m for message, added another feature in the index file or something along those lines, and press enter. Now before I press enter, I want you to pay close attention here. Right now Visual Studio says the file's been edited, has changes, and needs a commit message. So I'm going to press enter and keep an eye up there on the top left. As you can see, Visual Studio Code recognized that I made that change and it automatically updated. So I can do things like git sync, git pull from, all those things. I can do it all from the command line. And I have more options than are available with just the user interface. Also, there's some extensions here. A lot of really good extensions. Just type the word git and press enter in the marketplace, and you'll see all sorts of options. This is one of the more popular ones, which allows you to look at the Git history of your work, because there isn't really a good built-in way to see all of the different branches and changes that you've made, so some people have figured out how to do that. So I'd say just go ahead and check all of this out and see if there's any cool things that might be useful to you. Also, you'll find that GitHub likes to use Markdown for its readme file and other files as well. So there's also this kind of cool Markdown extension that you can install, so you can visually see what your Markdown looks like as you're typing it. Thank you for watching this video. If you want more like this, please like, comment, and click the bell to support my channel.